My name is Leah Whitaker. I was 34 when this started. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, my Aunt Beverly rented out my mother's lake house as the last living Whitaker sister. At dinner, she put me by the back door. "Foster paperwork doesn't make you family," she said, smiling over the turkey like she had only reminded me to pass the salt. I folded my napkin once and kept both hands still. But here's what Beverly didn't know. The woman calling herself my aunt had no Whitaker blood at all. That is the reason I'm sitting here telling you this. If family has ever tried to make you feel like a guest in a house built from your own love, stay with me. And if you believe no one should have to beg for a place in their own mother's home, like this video and subscribe before I take you back. I need to start before the locks, before the rental listing, and before Beverly learned what my mother had written down. Because before that Thanksgiving dinner, before that table full of people heard the truth, there was one summer afternoon in my mother's kitchen that explains everything. I was 9 the first time my mother marked my height on the kitchen doorframe. She made me stand with my heels against the trim and my chin straight. I remember the pencil in her hand. I remember the smell of lemon dish soap. I remember her saying, "Hold still, Leah. I want to get this right." That was my mother, Helen Whitaker. She got small things right on purpose. The lake house sat on the Michigan side of our family, 2 hours from the suburb where we lived most of the year. It was not a mansion. It had a sagging screen door, 2 bedrooms upstairs, 1 guest room off the back hall, and a kitchen table with old burn marks from casserole dishes. To my mother, it was not property first. It was memory first. She brought me there 3 weeks after the adoption was final. I did not know then that adults could use a word like final and still spend years arguing over whether it counted. I only knew my mother put my name on school forms, doctor forms, the church directory, and the Christmas stocking she hung beside hers. Everywhere she could write daughter, she wrote it. Beverly noticed. Aunt Beverly was not my aunt in the way people mean it on paper. She had grown up around the Whitakers. My grandmother had taken her in for a few summers, when Beverly's own mother was drinking too much and disappearing too often. By the time I came along, Beverly had been around so long that everyone just called her Aunt Beverly. Most of the younger cousins grew up hearing that name and never questioned it. Beverly used that laziness like a deed. She liked the word aunt even more when people said it in front of strangers. She wore it like a name tag nobody was allowed to check. The first time she called me a paperwork daughter, I was 11. We were cleaning up after Sunday dinner at the lake house. My mother had gone upstairs to rest because her joints were hurting, and I was rinsing plates at the sink. Beverly sat at the table with a glass of iced tea and watched me work. "You're a helpful little thing," she said. "But don't get confused. You're a paperwork daughter." I looked down at the plate in my hands. There was ketchup dried along the edge. I scrubbed that instead of answering. That was how Beverly spoke when no one important was close enough to hear. Not loud, not dramatic. Just soft enough that if I repeated it later, she could tilt her head and say I had misunderstood. My mother never misunderstood. One afternoon when I was 13, I heard Beverly say it again in the hallway. "Paperwork daughter," she said, like she was explaining a stain on the carpet. My mother came out of the downstairs bathroom with a folded towel in her hand. She did not raise her voice. She did not give Beverly a speech. She said, "Her name is Leah." Beverly smiled. "Of course it is." Then she walked into the kitchen and started telling my cousins where the serving spoons were, as if she had not just been corrected in another woman's house. That was Beverly's talent. She never fought the whole battle at once. She moved a salt shaker. She moved a chair. She moved a name from the center of a sentence to the edge. By the time anyone noticed, she was standing where you used to stand, acting surprised you wanted the space back. When I was 15, my mother got sick the first time. It began with appointments and ended with a pill organizer on the kitchen counter. At the lake house, I learned which mugs did not hurt her fingers. I learned how thin she liked her soup when her throat was sore. I learned that the blue quilt in the downstairs closet made her too warm, but the faded yellow one was just right. Beverly learned where the sympathy cards were kept. She signed them in careful loops. She wrote, "The Whitaker women" at the bottom, and underlined it twice. When neighbors brought food, she opened the door first. She knew how to place one hand on her chest and say, "We're managing." She was very good at looking useful while I carried laundry behind her. My mother saw more than Beverly wanted her to see. One night, after everyone left, Mom asked me to sit with her in the little sewing room off the back hall. The sewing room smelled like cedar chips and ironed cotton. She had a metal cookie tin on her lap, the kind that never once held cookies after it entered an American house. Needles, buttons, old keys. That was what those tins were really for. Under the tin was a book wrapped in a white dish towel. She put it in my hands. It was the Whitaker family Bible. The cover was cracked at the corners, and the pages had the soft, tired feel of paper people had touched for generations. I started to open it, but Mom placed her hand over mine. "When people get loud," she said, "look for what was written quietly." I thought she was talking about faith. Maybe she was. My mother could fit two meanings into a sentence, and still leave both of them clear. She told me to keep the Bible somewhere safe. I slid it into the bottom drawer of my dresser that night. For years, I thought it was only a keepsake. I did not know it was the one thing Beverly could not talk her way around. My mother recovered that year. Then she got sick again when I was 27. By then, I had a job, an apartment, and the bad habit of answering my phone on the first ring if her name showed up. The lake house became less of a summer place, and more of a second hospital with better light. I drove there after work on Fridays. I filled the freezer. I washed sheets. I learned the difference between helping someone live and keeping them comfortable while they let go. Beverly came on Saturdays. She brought flowers when other people were visiting. She brought stories when neighbors stopped by. She brought a voice that got softer when men from church were in the room. She would touch my mother's shoulder and say, "Helen, you rest. I'll handle the family things." Then she would hand me a trash bag and point to the bathroom. I did not mind work. Work was clean. Work told the truth. A floor was dirty or it was not. A pot of soup was warm or it was not. Beverly was harder. She could stand in the middle of a room I had cleaned and somehow make herself look like the one who had been holding the whole house together. Mom died in early October. The funeral was small because that was what she wanted. No big speeches. No white roses shaped like a gate to heaven. Just her church friends, a few cousins, 2 neighbors, and me standing near the front with my hands around a tissue I never used. Beverly cried beautifully. Some people cry with their whole face. Beverly cried in a way that made people hand her chairs. She pressed a handkerchief under one eye and let everyone see she was suffering. After the service, she hugged me for the first time in years and whispered, "We have to be careful now. Grief makes girls reckless." Girls. I was 34. After the funeral lunch, we went back to the lake house. I walked into the kitchen and saw Beverly standing by the counter with my mother's key bowl in both hands. It was the blue bowl with a crack down one side. Mom kept house keys there, shed keys, the tiny key to the old cash box, and the brass one she wore on a coil around her wrist when I was little. Beverly tipped the bowl into her purse. I said, "Those stay here." She did not look embarrassed. She looked inconvenienced. "Temporary," she said. "Someone has to organize things before you get emotional." I put out my hand. She dropped one shed key into my palm and closed her purse. That was the first real shift after Mom died. Beverly was no longer hinting that I was less family. She was acting like the house had been waiting for me to leave so she could begin. 2 weeks later, I drove up on a Thursday afternoon. The old lock was gone. I stood on the porch with my grocery bag against my hip and tried my key twice. The new lock clicked like it knew me and had chosen not to care. Through the screen, I could see the kitchen table. My mother's curtains were still there. The pencil marks on the doorframe were still there. I was the only thing that could not get in. Beverly opened the inner door but left the chain on. "It's temporary," she said. "You changed Mom's lock." I changed a lock on a family property. My mother's house. Her eyes moved over my face, slow and dry. Paperwork daughters panic over paperwork. I took a picture of the lock. Then I took a picture of her hand resting on the door like she owned the wood under it. The next week, a woman from church called me by accident. She thought she had reached Beverly. She wanted to ask if the lake house had a hairdryer, because her niece and her niece's husband were staying there for a weekend getaway. I stood in my apartment with my coat still on and listened to a stranger ask about towels in my mother's upstairs bathroom. I thanked her. Then I opened my laptop. The listing came up in less than a minute. There it was, my mother's lake house, photographed in bright afternoon light, with the kitchen table pushed toward the window and my old bedroom called a charming guest suite. The description said, "Historic Whitaker family home, hosted by Beverly Whitaker." Hosted, that was the word that made me sit down. Not owner, not aunt, not caretaker. Hosted. Like she had arranged the house, the grief, the name, and the dead woman who paid for it all into something neat enough for strangers to rent. The calendar showed Thanksgiving week blocked out. I took screenshots of every page. I saved Beverly's host name. I saved the line where she wrote, "Our family has loved this home for generations." My mother's handwriting was in a Bible under my bed, and Beverly was selling the word "our" by the night. That was when I stopped thinking this was only about keys. The first thing I did was take the Bible out from under my bed. I had not opened it in years. I had moved it from my dresser to a plastic storage box after Mom died, then from that box to the bottom shelf of my closet. I told myself I was keeping it safe. Really, I was keeping it out of sight, because touching it felt too much like touching the last day she trusted me with something. That night, after I found the rental listing, I sat on my bedroom floor and unwrapped the dish towel. The cover gave a small crack when I opened it. I turned past the first pages slowly, because the paper felt too thin for my hands. There were births written in blue ink, marriages written in black, and deaths written in pencil by people who must have thought pencil was gentler. Then I saw my name, Leah Whitaker. Under it, in my mother's handwriting, were 5 words. My daughter, my blessing. I read them once, then I read them again, because Beverly's voice had lived in my ear for so long that my mother's handwriting had to speak twice before I believed it was louder. I checked the rest of the family pages. There was no Beverly, no birth entry, no marriage entry, no adoption entry, no place where the Whitakers had written her in. I placed the Bible on a clean towel and photographed the pages that mattered. Then I photographed the blank space where Beverly's name would have been, if the story she told were true. The next morning, I went back to Mom's papers. My mother kept papers the way other women kept casserole recipes. Not messy, not pretty, practical. Insurance in one folder, the lake house in another. Medical papers in a thick blue binder with sticky notes that had lost their stick. At the bottom of a file box, under old property tax bills, I found a cream envelope with my name on it. Inside was a copy of a letter from my mother to Thomas Reed. I knew the name. Mr. Reed had been my mother's attorney for years. He was the kind of man who wore brown shoes in every season and used full sentences in text messages. The letter was short. My mother had asked him to make sure Beverly would never be thrown into the street. She wanted Beverly to have the back guest room if she needed it. She wanted a monthly caretaker payment to continue as long as Beverly helped with basic upkeep. Then I saw the amount. $2,400 a month. I sat back on my heels. Beverly had not just taken keys. She had been getting paid to protect the house she was renting to strangers. The letter had conditions. I am not going to pretend I understood every line. Legal language has a way of making a simple wrong wear a necktie. But the plain part was clear enough for me. Beverly was not supposed to claim the house as hers. She was not supposed to rent it out. She was not supposed to deny my rights to it. The letter also said Thomas Reed's office could stop Beverly's payment and access the moment those conditions were broken. That line mattered. It meant Beverly was not standing on family mercy. She was standing on a rule my mother had written before she died. I took one picture of the amount. I took one picture of my mother's signature. Then I closed the folder. By noon, I had a choice. I could drive to the lake house and bang on the door until Beverly got exactly what she wanted. Or I could make sure the next person who opened a door for her already knew what kind of name she was using. I chose the second door. I wrote one email to Thomas Reed. It was 8 sentences. I attached the rental listing, the lock photograph, the page from the family Bible, and the letter with the $2,400 payment. I did not call Beverly a thief. I did not call her a liar. I asked one question. Can you tell me whether these actions affect the arrangement my mother left for Beverly? Then I waited. Waiting is not passive when you have chosen it. It is just quiet work. Beverly did not wait. That afternoon, a group text lit up on my phone. The name at the top was Family Thanksgiving, which was funny in the way a locked door is funny when you still have groceries in your hand. Beverly wrote, "Thanksgiving will be at the lake house this year. I know Helen would want us together." Then came the second message. "Leah may attend if she behaves." I stared at the word attend. Not host. Not come home. Attend. Like I had been invited to a school concert in a building my mother paid taxes on. A cousin sent a thumbs up. Another asked what time. Nobody asked why Beverly was sending invitations from my mother's house. That was Beverly's other talent. She made the wrong thing sound organized, and people mistook organization for authority. A few minutes later, Beverly texted me privately. Do not go upstairs when you arrive. Renters may want a tour later. Renters. My old bedroom had become part of her sales pitch. I opened a folder on my laptop and named it Lake House. Not Mom, not Beverly, not betrayal, Lake House. Every screenshot went there. Every message went there. Every photograph went there. I made a list with dates, because dates do not get emotional on the witness stand, even if the person holding them does. That night, Thomas Reed replied. He said he had received the materials. He said he would review the existing arrangement. He asked whether Beverly had invited him to Thanksgiving. I had not known that she had. 5 minutes later, Beverly answered that question for me. She sent another group text. Mr. Reed may join us after dinner, to clarify some family matters so everyone can move forward. There it was. Beverly was bringing the one man who could say official things into the one room where she planned to make me look unofficial. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. It was not. I almost laughed because Beverly had spent years telling me paperwork did not make me family, and now she was dragging paperwork to Thanksgiving like it was a second turkey. The next day, Ruth Anders called. Ruth lived 2 houses down from the lake house. She had been my mother's friend before I was old enough to know adults had friends separate from their children. She brought lemon bars when Mom was sick and never once asked me to perform gratitude for them. Leah, she said. Are you renting your mother's place? No. There was a pause. A small one. Ruth was old enough to know that silence can be more polite than surprise. I saw 3 cars there last weekend, she said. Beverly told me it was family business. That's what she's calling it. Ruth breathed out through her nose. Honey, did your mother know about this? The question hit harder than an accusation would have. It was not legal. It was not strategic. It was the plain human center of the whole thing. No, I said. She didn't. Ruth did not ask for gossip. She did not ask me to tell her every ugly detail. She only said, Your mother kept a spare key with me for emergencies. Do you want me to hold on to it? I closed my eyes. Yes, I said. Please. That was the first person outside my own anger who treated the house like it still had a rightful daughter. The week before Thanksgiving, Beverly's confidence got louder. She changed her profile name on the rental site to Beverly Whitaker. She posted a picture of the porch with pumpkins on the steps. She wrote, preparing our family home for the holiday. Our. She liked that word almost as much as aunt. Then she sent me one final message. Remember, Leah. This dinner is not the place for your feelings. I typed 3 replies and deleted all of them. The 4th was the only one I sent. I understand. That was all. I understood more than she thought. On the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, I went to the print shop near my apartment. I printed the Bible page, the listing, Beverly's messages, and my mother's letter to Mr. Reed. The young man behind the counter asked if I wanted everything stapled. No, I said. Separate. Some truths need room to be placed down one at a time. I put the papers in a plain manila envelope. Then I wrapped the family Bible in the same white dish towel my mother had used years earlier. I did not put it in a box. It had been hidden long enough. On Thanksgiving morning, I packed 3 things. The Bible, the envelope, the old brass key my mother used to wear on her wrist. I left everything else behind. Beverly wanted a scene. She wanted me overloaded, emotional, carrying grief into the room with both arms so she could point at it and call it proof. I gave her nothing extra to point at. When I reached the lake house, there were cars along the gravel drive. I recognized most of them. A few belonged to people I had not seen since the funeral. Beverly had chosen her audience well. Enough family to make it hurt. Enough outsiders to make it humiliating. Enough witnesses to make her feel safe. She opened the door before I knocked. She wore my mother's apron. Not one like it. Hers. It was faded green, with a small burn mark near the pocket from the year Mom tried to make gravy and answer the phone at the same time. Beverly had tied it tight around her waist. There you are, she said. She looked at the Bible in my arms and smiled at it like it was a casserole. I hope you didn't bring anything that will upset people. I stepped inside. No, I said. I brought something Mom kept. For the first time that day, Beverly's smile missed a beat. Only a beat. Then she turned toward the dining room and called out, "Everyone, Leah's here." She made my name sound like an announcement and a warning. I followed her in with the Bible against my ribs, the envelope under my arm, and the brass key in my coat pocket. I could feel the key each time I moved. It tapped once against my hip. Small. Steady. Dinner did not start when I walked in. Beverly made sure of that. She wanted everyone to see me arrive with the Bible in my arms. She wanted the room to notice that I had brought something old, something wrapped, something she could call dramatic if I opened it too soon. So I placed it on the sideboard beside the cranberry dish and walked to the seat she had chosen for me. It was by the back door. Again, the chair was half an inch lower than the others because it had always been the extra chair from the mudroom. I knew that because I had dragged it into the kitchen every summer when cousins came. Beverly had not picked it by accident. She rarely did anything by accident when a small insult would do. "Leah, you don't mind sitting there," she said. It was not a question. "I can hear from here," I said. That was the first quiet reward of the day. Her mouth tightened, just a little. She had expected me to ask for a different chair. She had expected me to hand her a performance. I gave her a sentence she could not use. Thomas Reed was already in the living room. I saw his brown shoes first. He stood near the fireplace with a paper cup of coffee and the patient face of a man who had learned not to react before all the facts were in. Beverly introduced him twice, both times louder than necessary. "Mr. Reed is here to help us settle confusion," she said. He nodded to me. Not warmly, not coldly, just clearly. That nod told me he had read my email. "Before I take you into that dining room, tell me one word you would have needed to hear if someone tried to make you a guest in your own mother's house." For me, that word was steady. Now let me take you back to Beverly's table. Dinner moved like a machine Beverly had practiced. She carved the turkey from my mother's platter. She told my cousin Dana where to put the rolls. She sent a teenage nephew to the back porch for extra ice, like she had been running that house for 30 years. Every few minutes, she looked toward me to see if the apron, the chair, or the way she said "our home" would finally pull a reaction out of me. I ate what was on my plate. Not much. Enough. Halfway through dinner, Beverly began talking about the rental guests. She did not call them renters at first. She called them holiday visitors, like the house had invited them itself. "We have 6 full weeks blocked," she said. "Thanksgiving through New Year's. People love a house with history." A fork touched a plate near me and stopped. She kept going. "The deposit is already paid. Some people may not understand this, but maintaining a family property costs money." She looked at me when she said "some people." Then she lifted a small envelope from the side of her place setting. I recognized it at once. It was the envelope where my mother had kept the spare house key, with the little paper label that said "back door." Beverly tapped it against her palm. "After dessert," she said, "I'll need the last old keys turned in. The guests arrive Monday morning, and we cannot have loose keys floating around." Loose keys? That was what she called the last thing my mother had trusted me to hold. There it was. The countable pressure. 6 weeks. A paid deposit. Guests on Monday. A key deadline before dessert. A house full of witnesses. My mother's apron tied around Beverly's waist. And my suitcase in the mudroom. I saw it before dessert. It was my old navy one. The zipper had a red thread tied through the pull because it used to stick. Beverly had dragged it down from my bedroom and placed it near my chair. On top of it was a folded paper grocery bag, with 3 framed photographs inside. I could see the corner of one frame, my mother and me on the dock. I was 12. She was laughing at something outside the picture. Beverly saw me looking. "I gathered what was personal," she said. "The renters may want a tour later." That was the cruelest thing she did before the speech, not the chair, not the apron. The suitcase. A chair could be moved. An apron could be untied. That suitcase said she had already walked through my room and decided what part of my life was portable. I put my fork down. Beverly leaned forward. She thought the scene had finally arrived. I picked up my water glass instead. My hand did not shake. I drank slowly, set the glass back where it had been, and looked at the suitcase once more. The red thread on the zipper looked almost silly. That helped. Grief can become too large to hold, but a red thread is only a red thread. I could hold that. Thomas Reed did not speak during the meal. That mattered. Beverly wanted him to nod along. She wanted his silence to look like agreement. But he kept his hands around his coffee and watched the room the way a person watches a door with smoke under it. He was not there to rescue me. I did not need rescue. He was there to hear what Beverly would say when she believed she had already won. After the plates were cleared, Beverly told everyone to stay seated. Before dessert, she said, we need to settle who actually belongs to this house. Thomas Reed looked down at his cup. Ruth Anders sat near the far end of the table. Beverly had invited her because Ruth had been my mother's friend and made the room look respectable. That was Beverly's mistake. Ruth had brought a pie, not loyalty. Beverly placed both hands on the back of the chair at the head of the table. My mother's chair. She did not sit in it. She stood behind it, like standing there was enough to make the room hers. Leah has been struggling, she said. I let that sentence pass. She is grieving, and grief can make a person cling to things that were never really theirs. I let that pass too. A cousin shifted in his seat. Someone cleared a throat. Beverly took those tiny sounds as permission. This house has always been Whitaker property, she said. And as the last living Whitaker sister, I have had to make difficult choices. Thomas Reed lifted his eyes then. Only for a second. Beverly did not notice. She was watching me. The practical reality is simple, she said. Leah was loved. No one denies that. But love and legal family are not the same thing. She waited for me to flinch. I did not. She smiled with pity she had polished all morning. Foster paperwork doesn't make you family. There it was again. The room held the words differently this time. At dinner, she had thrown them like a scrap. Now she placed them in the center of the table and expected everyone to eat around them. I looked at the Bible on the sideboard. Then I looked at the suitcase by the door. That was the trap. If I reached for the suitcase, I would look defeated. If I reached for my phone, I would look angry. If I reached for Thomas Reed first, Beverly would say I had turned Thanksgiving into a legal ambush. So I reached for the one thing she had dismissed all her life. I stood up slowly. Beverly's smile widened. She thought I was leaving. I walked to the sideboard and picked up the Bible. The dish towel was still wrapped around it. My mother's towel. White cotton, blue stripe along one edge. I held it against my ribs for one breath. Then I turned back to the table. Beverly, I said, you're right about one thing. Her eyebrows rose. This should be settled in front of family. That was the match. No one moved. I did not open the Bible yet. Not in that part of the room. Not while Beverly still controlled the head of the table. I carried it back to my seat by the door. I set it on the table in front of the lowest chair in the room, the chair Beverly had chosen for me. Then I looked at Thomas Reed. Mr. Reed, I said, before anyone signs or agrees to anything tonight, I'd like everyone to see what my mother kept. Beverly's hand slipped off the chair back. Just an inch. But I saw it. So did Ruth. The Bible lay between my plate and the suitcase. Beverly had put me by the exit. She had put my things by the exit. She had put her insult right in the middle of the room. She had not understood that a back door can still face the whole table. I placed my palm on the cover and waited until Beverly stopped smiling. Then I opened the Bible to the page my mother had touched last. The table did not understand what it was looking at yet. That was good. A truth that has to push through noise needs one clean second before people start protecting themselves from it. I turned the book around slowly. Beverly, I said, you told everyone paperwork does not make me family. That is not what It is exactly what you said. My voice stayed level. I heard that more than I felt it. My hand was flat on the Bible page, and under my palm was the old paper my mother had kept for years. Not a lawyer's paper. Not a county paper. A family page. I slid my hand down. There was my name, Leah Mae Whitaker. Under it, in my mother's handwriting, were the words she had written when I was 9. My daughter. My blessing. No one spoke at first. Ruth Anders put one hand to her throat. My cousin Dana lowered her fork onto her plate so carefully it made no sound. Thomas Reed took off his glasses and looked at Beverly. Not at me. Beverly stared at the page like it had changed languages. That is sentimental, she said. It is, I said. That is why we should look at the rest of it. I turned one page back, then one page forward. Births, marriages, deaths, notes in different ink, dates written by hands that were gone. The Whitaker family had left a trail of names because that was what families did before they learned to put everything behind passwords. There was no Beverly. Not Beverly as a birth. Not Beverly as a marriage. Not Beverly as an adoption. Not Beverly as anything but a woman who had been loved enough to be helped, and bold enough to turn help into ownership. Beverly's face tightened. My name not being in an old book does not mean anything, she said. You were the one who said we should settle who belongs to this house, I said. Thomas Reed set his coffee cup on the side table. Beverly, he said. Did you rent this property under the name Beverly Whitaker? She blinked at him. The question was small. That made it worse. There was no place to hide in it. I handled a practical matter, she said. That was not my question. Her fingers reached for the back of my mother's chair. She had been holding that chair like a railing all evening. Now it looked less like a throne, and more like something keeping her upright. Thomas repeated it. Did you rent this property under the name Beverly Whitaker? Beverly glanced toward the cousins. No one moved to help her. One cousin looked down at the tablecloth. Another looked straight at the rental printout beside the Bible. Yes, Beverly said. For maintenance. Thomas nodded once. I placed the printed listing on the table. I did not slide it hard. I did not make a show of it. The paper landed beside my mother's handwriting, and that was enough. Historic Whitaker Family Home, hosted by Beverly Whitaker. Ruth's mouth tightened when she read it. She reached for the edge of the table, not dramatically, just enough to steady her fingers. Thomas asked the second question. Did Helen ever legally make you a Whitaker heir? Beverly opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The room had more sound than silence then. A chair leg tapped once. Somebody breathed in through their teeth. The refrigerator hummed behind us like it had no manners, and no idea the family had just cracked open. Beverly tried again. Helen wanted me taken care of. That is not the same thing, Thomas said. He picked up the folder Beverly had brought, the one she had placed beside her plate like a weapon that was already loaded. He opened it, looked at the first page, then closed it again. The sound of that folder closing was small. It still moved through the room. No one is signing this tonight, he said. Beverly's hand slipped from the chair back. Thomas placed the folder flat on the table, away from Beverly. Helen's arrangement allowed you the back guest room and a monthly caretaker payment as long as you protected the property and did not represent yourself as owner or heir. Helen also gave my office authority to stop that payment and access the moment those conditions were broken. The rental listing, the changed locks, and the statement you made here tonight end that arrangement. He looked at me then. Effective now. Beverly made a sound that was almost a laugh. You cannot do that, at Thanksgiving. Thomas did not answer the holiday part. He pulled a pen from his jacket and wrote one line on the top page of his own notes. Then he capped the pen and set it down. The gesture was plain. Dry. Final. Ruth pushed her chair back. For a moment, I thought she was leaving. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her cardigan and took out a brass key on a small blue ribbon. My mother's spare. Ruth walked around the table slowly. Nobody stopped her. Beverly watched the key swing from Ruth's fingers, and the color left the top of her cheeks first. Ruth did not give a speech. She laid the key beside the Bible. Your mother kept that key on her wrist the day she brought you home, she said. That was the moment Beverly truly understood. Not when Thomas spoke. Not when the folder closed. When Ruth placed the key beside my name and my mother's handwriting, Beverly saw the thing she had never believed in. She saw that I had not been added to the family by weakness, pity, or paperwork alone. I had been brought home. I had been kept. I had been written down. The room moved around that truth. Dana covered her mouth with both hands. My Uncle Paul pushed Beverly's envelope back toward her with 2 fingers, like it had become dirty. Thomas gathered the rental printout and the stipend letter into one neat stack. Ruth stayed beside me, her hand resting on the back of the low mudroom chair. Beverly looked smaller behind my mother's chair. Then she reached for the apron knot at her waist. She could not untie it at first. Her fingers would not work. The green fabric bunched under her hands, and for one sharp second, I wanted to help her. That surprised me. After everything, the old training was still there. See a mess. Fix it. I stayed still. Beverly finally pulled the knot loose. The apron fell open. She slipped it off and laid it over the chair, not folded, not claimed, not hers. Leah, she said, and my name sounded strange in her mouth without the little hook she usually put in it. We are family. We can fix this. I looked at the Bible. Then I looked at the suitcase she had put by the door. No, I said. Family does not begin with a lie and end with my mother's house rented out. She swallowed. I did not raise my voice. I did not call her what she had earned. The Bible had done its work. The key had done its work. Even the listing had done its work. Thomas turned one more paper toward Beverly. "You will need to return the house keys before you leave tonight," he said. "The caretaker payment stops immediately. The guest room arrangement is ended. We will handle the rental guests through my office." Beverly looked at him as if he had taken the floor away. In a way, he had. The floor she thought she owned had my mother's name under it. Beverly reached into her purse. The blue key bowl was not there, of course. She had not brought the bowl. She had brought only what she could control. One by one, she placed 3 keys on the table. The front door, the back door, the upstairs room. Each key landed with a small sound. No one clapped. No one shouted. I was glad. Noise would have made it feel cheaper than it was. When the last key touched the wood, Beverly looked at me. For the first time in my life, she did not look at me like a child who had been let in. She looked at me like the person who had just shown everyone the door she had been standing in front of. I picked up the brass key Ruth had returned to me. Then I closed the Bible. Not hard. Just enough. The house did not become quiet after Beverly left. A room can lose the loudest person and still keep the shape of what she did. For a while, nobody knew where to put their hands. Thomas Reed gathered his papers. Ruth folded my mother's apron and laid it across the back of the chair. Dana carried plates to the sink because some people can only apologize by washing something. Beverly did not slam the door. She put on her coat in the mudroom, with her purse hooked over one arm and her face held very still. Thomas walked with her because the keys in his hand were no longer hers to manage. I stayed at the table. That was not mercy. It was a boundary. I had spent too many years following Beverly into hallways where she could lower her voice and change the story. This time, the story stayed in the room. By the following Monday, the listing was gone. The page that had called my mother's house a historic Whitaker family home showed only a gray notice that said unavailable. The 6-week rental was canceled through Thomas's office. The deposit went back to the guests from Beverly's account, not mine. Her caretaker payment stopped before December. $2,400 a month. I had never seen Beverly look at that number as money before. She had treated it like proof she mattered. When it stopped, she stopped calling it practical. She called it cruel. Thomas sent me one short letter that week. It said the caretaker arrangement was closed, the rental account was frozen for review, and all future access to the house would go through me. The back guest room was cleared out the next week. Thomas arranged it because I did not want to stand in the doorway and watch her fold sweaters. I came up on Saturday morning after he called to say she had finished. 3 boxes sat on the porch. Her name was written on them in thick black marker. The guest room smelled like cold air and lavender drawer liners. The house felt older without her things. Not sadder, just older. I changed the locks that afternoon. The locksmith asked how many copies I wanted. I said 2. 1 for me, 1 for Ruth Anders. He did not ask why an old neighbor needed a key to my mother's house. Good workers know when a house is saying more than the owner wants to explain. A week before Christmas, Beverly sent a card. The envelope was cream-colored. She still had beautiful handwriting. Inside, there was a picture of a snow-covered church and a message that said, "Helen would not want us divided." There was no apology. No sentence that said she had lied. No sentence that said she had rented my mother's house under a name that was not hers. No sentence that said she had put my suitcase by the back door on Thanksgiving and tried to call it family order. Just Helen's name, used one more time as a handle. I read the card once. Then I turned it over and wrote one line on the back. Helen did not divide us. Your lie did. I mailed it back in the same envelope. That was the last thing I sent Beverly. People always want to know if I forgave her. They ask it softly, like forgiveness is a blanket I either put over the whole mess or left folded on a chair. I do not think of it that way. I let go of the part of the pain that made me rehearse arguments in the shower. I stopped giving Beverly free rooms in my head. But I did not give her a key. Those are different things. In spring, I opened the lake house again. Not for renters. Not for cousins who had sat through Thanksgiving with their eyes on their plates. I opened it first for myself. I drove there on a Friday with a box of groceries, a new lockbox, and the family Bible on the passenger seat. The screen door still complained when I pulled it open. The kitchen still caught the afternoon light near the sink. My mother's pencil marks were still on the doorframe. I stood in front of them for a long time with a damp cloth in my hand. I did not add a new mark. I wiped the dust from the old ones. Then I put the Bible on the kitchen shelf where my mother kept cookbooks. I did not wrap it in the dish towel. I did not hide it under a bed. It stood there in the open, cracked cover and all, beside a church cookbook with 3 loose pages tucked inside. Later that day, Ruth came by with lemon bars. She did not knock. She used her key. That sound healed, something I had not known was still waiting. Not because the lock turned, because the right person turned it. Ruth walked into the kitchen and saw the Bible on the shelf. She touched the spine with 2 fingers, then touched the pencil marks on the doorframe. She did not cry. Ruth was not the kind of woman who wasted tears when a hand on a doorframe could say more. She would like this, Ruth said. I hope so. She would, Ruth said again. And that time it was not comfort. It was testimony. We ate lemon bars at the kitchen table. The same table where Beverly had tried to make me smaller. Ruth told me a story about the day Mom brought me home, how Helen had walked in carrying a sleepy 9-year-old girl and a plastic grocery bag full of socks because she was afraid I would not have enough. I had never heard that detail. The socks mattered to me more than a speech would have. Love is often ridiculous like that. It panics over socks. By the end of that summer, the house had a new rhythm. Ruth had her key. I had mine. The family Bible stayed on the kitchen shelf. The old brass key hung on a small hook by the back door, not because I needed it, but because my mother had carried it the day she brought me home. Some things do not have to be useful to be true. I learned that family is not the person who says your name the loudest at dinner. Family is the woman who writes your name down when nobody is watching. Family is the neighbor who keeps the spare key because your mother trusted her. Family is the friend who can walk into a quiet kitchen with lemon bars and know not to ask you to explain why you are still standing there. It was never about the lake house alone. It was about a Bible, a brass key, a suitcase by the back door, and $2,400 a month Beverly thought made her untouchable. It was about one sentence she kept using like a broom, trying to sweep me out of my own life. Paperwork, daughter. That phrase used to land in my chest. Now it lands on paper where it belongs. That's my story. My name is Leah Whitaker. I was 34 when Beverly tried to erase me. I was never Beverly's paperwork daughter. I was Helen's daughter, written down before anyone thought to argue. If someone has ever made you feel like a guest in the place where you gave the most love, please hear me clearly. You do not have to shrink yourself until they are comfortable calling you family. You are allowed to keep the key to the life that was truly yours. Share this with someone who needs to remember that a boundary can be an honest door. Tell me in the comments one word you would keep if a family tried to erase you. And if you want more calm stories about truth, dignity, and the moment a quiet woman finally stops moving aside, subscribe and stay with me.